Hey there, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in the world. I'm Dave Sobel, host of the Business of Tech podcast, here with a couple more stories to go over today to give you some additional insights into what's going on in the marketplace. If you're not aware, the Business of Tech is my daily 5-minute podcast, which gives you insight and analysis on some news stories that affect you if you deliver technology services. Would really appreciate those subscriptions. If you're not already a listener, go to mspradio.com, click on the subscribe now button, and you'll get access to it on all of your favorite platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and all of the various podcatchers you might be interested in. Today, I'm going to break down 5 stories that I didn't do in the podcast here for the live stream. There's a little bit more of a freeform analysis as opposed to the way that we do it on the podcast, where it is super targeted and timely. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. If you are interested in interacting with me there, you can do so. I stream on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Twitch, and on Periscope, all simultaneously. And I get all of the chat here. So if you've got comments, I look forward to hearing from them. Let's dive in. So, the first one that jumped out at me was the NYPD dropping paper in favor of an app. This is kind of timely because of course, what happened with the app in Iowa this week. So the NYPD is dropping their old school paper memo book. If you're not aware, this is one of the items that the NYPD issues to all of its officers. The individual officer is responsible for its management on an ongoing basis so that they make sure to have it, because it is still evidence even when they retire. So this is them moving from a really old school technology to a new iPhone app. What they're going to do is they're going to go ahead and get rid of the old method, roll out an app. They do this on February 17th. This moves the data collection from, of course, the endpoint to a central location. What really jumped out at me about this particular article was they were asking really good questions, because this is a business version of the personal tracking. The officers are asking about whether or not this data will be used from the perspective of accountability on officers' whereabouts, and whether the actions will be used to further scrutinize officers. Their entries are logged with time and location information, and now, of course, the department has real-time access to that information. For me, that was the bit that really, really jumped out. Excuse me. The idea that these officers would now be tracked on an ongoing basis, it has both, of course, privacy concerns and possible productivity implications. But the fact that they're all asking these questions and thinking about it from that perspective is what I really wanted to take away. We talk about these issues oftentimes from purely a consumer perspective, but here's a really great example of thinking about them now in a business context. Is it appropriate? What level of oversight is appropriate? And what level of freedom do you want to give to employees? For example, there's a pretty solid argument for giving officers some leeway to interact in the community, have time to build those bonds with the connection, with their constituents, have times to interact. And I thought that that conversation was what was most interesting to me about this particular article. Next up today, the chip industry had its worst sales year since the dotcom bubble burst. Memory was hit the hardest. All regions did experience a decline in demand. The fourth quarter had some growth. However, they're saying in order to continue that, there's going to need to be continued work on the China and U.S. trade agreement. So, this is something that for anybody in the technology business we are interested in, because understanding these particular cycles of hardware does matter. I know that a number of solution providers were impacted by hardware shortages last year. Looks like it wasn't a great year for chips because of that. So from my perspective, again, we're looking here. Do we think this is going to get better for next year? I'm not entirely convinced. I don't actually necessarily think this is going to get better, and I'm not entirely sure that this positioning from the marketplace is going to make this different. But I think this is something to keep an eye on and something that we're going to need to understand. I'd love to know what other people's predictions are. All my social is there on screen right now. I'd love to hear what you from the industry think are going to happen in terms of this piece. So I thought that was pretty interesting and worth noting. Next up, our third story. Only 3 of the top 100 international airports pass basic security tests and checks. What mattered here? So they did a number of security checks against the environment, but what I thought was interesting was the specific list. I've included the link is in the description of the live streams, and I'll make sure that that's available. But this particular list is what was useful to me. When I looked and said, here you've got ImmunoWeb, who's doing scannings against this. This gives a lot of insight into the kinds of things security insiders are looking for when they're doing this. There's been a lot of conversation recently around securities, particularly for solution providers and the way that they handle security. This list, super useful to give you insight into what goes on. It's beyond just the basic bits of, oh, are they patched? Have they properly implemented SSL? Are they doing things like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC? I'm not sure how many MSPs are actually doing DMARC. I spent some time myself recently trying to learn and understand and roll out DMARC for a couple of my domains. It isn't a complicated process, and you need to make sure that you're doing it in such a way that actually helps out. The more you do DMARC, though, the better you can do from an authentication perspective on email. So that's what jumped out at me, was the fact that there was a specific list that gave recommendations. It gives insight into that additional bit. With MSPs under fire for proper security, you're going to be looking for either you're going to have to make sure you've got that knowledge inside, or be partnering to do something from that perspective. Next up, I like a good press release. I like good looking into the data that I see from a press release. And here I had one from the folks at NetRicks, who do information security and governance. Now, they survey their MSP partners. I thought their trends were a bit of no S. It was kind of an obvious piece. Now, I do nerd out on looking at data, but this didn't give me a ton of insight. That's worth highlighting, and obviously I'm taking a look at it here. But you look at these bits, it's like, okay, what's the changing market trend they're citing? Increased customer satisfaction. Okay, adding security and compliance on top of standard offerings does this. That seems obvious. And I think that's one of those bits where the survey's kind of fallen down and not giving us real insights. I think it's not just a better customer satisfaction. I think this is you must do this. So I looked and said there, we've got the typical vertical specific solutions recommendation. You're seeing it around legal and health, real estate, financial sector, healthcare, and of course the call to partners. I don't think this is bad data. I think it is actually much more, though, of a lagging indicator than a leading one. This is telling us a little too much about what has happened and not enough about what's going to happen. I don't think that these are necessarily market trends to say security and compliance offerings are game changers. I think they're what you have to do. I think that at this point, if you're not in that game, you are in serious trouble. So I wanted to highlight it from that perspective, going, yeah, I'm not sure this is a changing market trend. I think this perspective is a little bit lagging. I talked yesterday on the podcast a lot about the trend and the confluence that we're seeing of all of this security criticism. If you didn't catch Monday's episode, the Secretary of State for Louisiana was specifically criticizing MSPs for their lax security policies and what's been going on in his state. That's the headline. This isn't a changing market trend. This is oh my God, you need to catch up. So I'm going to give that particular piece of feedback there. Finally, I needed a good laugh. And I have to point out that while it's not entirely tech related, it certainly is when you put Jeff Bezos in the title. And I happen to live in DC, so this was good fun to close us out. $16,000 in parking tickets while renovating the mansion. He, over a period of time, actually, you can actually see that this is going to the local government, not to the federal government, by the way. But the fact that they racked up $16,840 in parking tickets while working on the conversion from a museum into a residence was certainly notable. At this point, they are paid. However, the tickets have all been paid, so kudos on him for paying the tickets, or at least all of the people related paying their parking tickets. think that was the bits that were certainly most notable to me from this particular week. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of thought again on this, but I like to do this. I'm working on the podcast for this evening right now, and these are some of the stories from the last few days that I was particularly interested in. Again, the podcast is The Business of Tech. You can catch it every single weekday for 5 minutes. It's available on all the podcatchers as an Amazon Alexa skill. You can catch it on YouTube, and all the links get shared on a daily basis right at 5 p.m. when the episode goes live. I hope these are useful. I'm going to start working on scheduling them. If you are interested in the event timing, they may vary from week to week as I figure out what time works and what time is most interesting to people. You can follow me on LinkedIn or on Facebook, where I'm announcing the times of the particular events so that you can sign up, see when they're notified, and know when the live streams are. Also, look for some additional announcements coming later this month. There'll be a way for you to support the content and get involved from a community perspective. I will be adding some Q&A sessions so that you can ask questions and get insights on a regular basis via a subscriber Q&A. So look for that coming in the next 2 to 3 weeks. With that, appreciate everybody's time. Please make sure to sign up for the podcast at mspradio.com. Thanks for your attention. Like, share, and subscribe. Give me feedback. My email address is dave@mspradio.com, and look forward to talking to you next time.